In the heart of Eastern Europe, a scar still bleeds. Crimea, once Ukrainian now occupied, has become the world's most dangerous bargaining chip. A new deal is on the table. Trump wants peace by giving Putin what he stole. But Kyiv's answer is thunderous never. Just 24 hours later, Russia responds with one of the deadliest strikes in months. This isn't just a war of bullets, it's a war of borders, of memory. The Trump administration proposed a peace plan that would formally recognize Russia's control over Crimea. And Kyiv's answer was swift and unequivocal. Absolutely not. President Volodymyr Zelensky made it clear recognizing the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea would not only violate Ukraine's constitution, but betray the millions who still dream of reunification. It will never happen, Zelensky declared, refusing to trade territory for a temporary peace. But it's not only Ukraine does not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about. This is beyond our constitution. It's our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine. As soon as we start talking about Crimea, about our sovereign territories, we enter a format that Russia wants, which is to drag out the war, because it will not be possible to quickly agree on everything that if the Americans are with us and the Russians leave, we will restore it together and make money on electricity. I think it's good, but I have never heard such official rumors. Some people, technical staff at different levels, media. There are many such messages and rumors. Officially, I have never heard a proposal officially. The proposal, which also included barring Ukraine from joining NATO, has ignited outrage across Ukraine's political spectrum. Former presidential aide Kosta Antonellisev called it worse than political suicide, insisting no Ukrainian politician would ever legitimize the occupation of sovereign land. But Trump, clearly frustrated, fired back on social media. Crimea was lost years ago, he wrote. He can have peace, or he can fight another 3 years and lose the whole country. However, within 24 hours of the proposal, Moscow launched one of the deadliest strikes on Kyiv since last summer, at a bloody missile and drone barrage that killed at least 9 and wounded over 60 as deadly missiles rained down on Kyiv. Trump called out Putin, slamming the strike as unnecessary and urging an immediate end to the bloodshed. I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir Stilp. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying that let's get the peace deal done. But how did Russia occupy Crimea in 2014 without much resistance? This is the Crimea story. In the early months of 2014, the world watched as the Crimean Peninsula, a region steeped in centuries of contested history, became the epicenter of a geopolitical earthquake. The annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation, following the ouster of Ukraine's pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych, marked the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian War and fundamentally altered the security landscape of Europe. The roots of the crisis traced back to February 2014, when Ukraine's revolution of dignity forced Yanukovych from power. In the ensuing political vacuum, pro-Russian demonstrations erupted in Crimea, a region with a significant ethnic Russian population and deep historical ties to Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin, seizing the moment, ordered his security chiefs to initiate plans to return Crimea to Russia on February 27, 2014, that unmarked Russian special forces later acknowledged by Putin as Russian troops swiftly occupied strategic sites across Crimea, including airports and the parliament building in Simferopol. The local government was dismissed. A new pro-Russian administration installed and a referendum on Crimea's status was hastily announced. The controversial referendum took place on March 16, 2014, under the shadow of Russian military occupation. According to the Russian-installed authorities, 96.8% of voters supported joining Russia, with a reported turnout of 83.1%. International observers, however, widely condemned the vote as illegitimate. Citing significant abuses and the absence of credible oversight, the referendum, critics argued, served merely as a fig leaf for a decision already made in Moscow that on March 17th, Crimea's authorities declared independence and formally requested to join the Russian Federation. The following day, President Putin and Crimean leaders signed a treaty on accession, and by March 21st, the Russian parliament had ratified the treaty, officially incorporating Crimea and the city of Sebastopol as federal subjects of Russia. The annexation was met with swift and widespread condemnation from the international community. The European Union, the United States, and their allies imposed a series of sanctions targeting Russian officials, financial institutions, and trade with Crimea. The EU, for example, banned imports from Crimea, prohibited investments and tourism services, and restricted the export of certain goods and technologies to the region. These measures remain in place and were most recently extended until June 2025. Underscore the EU's continued non-recognition of the annexation and its commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity and declaring the referendum invalid. For Kyiv, the loss of Crimea was a profound blow, both strategically and symbolically. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his predecessors have repeatedly insisted that Crimea remains an integral part of Ukraine and that any peace settlement must include its return following annexation. Russia rapidly militarized the peninsula by deploying additional troops, upgrading naval bases, and integrating Crimea into its administrative, legal, and economic systems. While Moscow hailed the move as a remarkable event and a restoration of historical justice, the reality on the ground was more complex. Economically, the costs of integrating Crimea have been significant for Russia. Estimates suggest annual subsidies and infrastructure projects, including the construction of the Kerch Strait Bridge to connect Crimea to mainland Russia, have cost Moscow billions of dollars. The region's isolation from Ukraine led to challenges in water, electricity, and gas supplies, necessitating further investment. Russian business analysts have questioned the economic benefits, noting Crimea's limited industrial base and the high costs of transportation and subsidies for many Crimeans. The transition brought uncertainty. While some ethnic Russians welcomed unification with Moscow, ethnic Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars, who had suffered under Soviet repression, faced increased pressure. Reports of human rights abuses, including restrictions on free speech, assembly, and the media, have persisted since the takeover. The annexation of Crimea set a precedent that reverberated far beyond the Black Sea. It emboldened separatist movements in eastern Ukraine and provided the backdrop for Russia's broader invasion of Ukraine in 2022, which saw further territorial occupations and a full-scale war. Crimea's strategic value home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet and a vital military outpost has made it a focal point in the ongoing conflict. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis have repeatedly stalled in recent months. The United States, under the Trump administration, has floated the possibility of recognizing Russian control over Crimea as part of a broader peace proposal to end the war in Ukraine. Such a move would represent a dramatic shift in long-standing U.S. policy and has been met with fierce resistance from Kyiv, which considers any recognition of Russian sovereignty over Crimea a red line. The EU, meanwhile, has reaffirmed its refusal to recognize the annexation and continues to support Ukraine's territorial integrity. A decade after the dramatic events of 2014, Crimea remains at the heart of a bitter geopolitical struggle for Russia. The annexation is a point of national pride and strategic gain for Ukraine and much of the international community. It is a symbol of aggression and a violation of the post-Cold War order. The consequences continue to unfold. Sanctions remain in place. Diplomatic relations are strained, and the peninsula's future is far from settled. As the war in Ukraine grinds on and peace negotiations falter, the question of Crimea's status remains one of the most intractable and contentious issues in European security, a flashpoint where history, identity, and geopolitics collide.